Get more now on all of this. With me here in studio, Behnam Ben Taleblu, Middle East security expert and senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for coming into the studio tonight. We saw those emotional scenes really on the streets of Israel, tens, hundreds of thousands of people clearly calling for a hostage deal. Why don't you think we've seen one yet? We saw that swap obviously back in December where many hostages were freed, but nothing since then.
Indeed, great to be with you. India, multiple cities have faced major protests, not just Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, all across the north as well. In short, I think the Israeli government doesn't see an opportunity for it. And more recently, there's been no shortcoming of drama between Jerusalem and Washington. But right now, even the Biden administration has said that the reason for the latest collapse in hostage talks and even ceasefire talks lays much more with Hamas. That's a message that Prime Minister Netanyahu has tried to transfer to the Israeli population, but given the gut-wrenching imagery that's coming out, that message has not fallen on open ears.
Do you think there's a deal that he would take, the Prime Minister? Hamas has said, that they agreed to a deal, the original parameters set many months ago by President Biden. Do you think that Netanyahu has done enough to maybe negotiate a bit or backtrack on his stance to get more hostages out?
I'm sure there could be one, again, especially if past as president, there have been pauses, there's been hostage swaps. But right now, I think what matters most is the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground is the battlefield in Gaza. I think the Israeli military has had a fair amount of success there. They don't want to give up the Philadelphia corridor. That's a key issue of tension with Defense Minister Gallant, who recently has spoken to Secretary of Defense Austin here about those hostages, including that dual national Israeli-American individual, that young man that you aired a clip from earlier today. But I think in the short term, the government is shaken, but if you can borrow a phrase, but not stirred. You even had the Israeli finance minister, Smotrich, try to head off some of the labor strikes, but likely to no avail.
Let's talk about Hamas briefly. Israel says that these hostages, the bodies that were just discovered, were likely killed a couple of days only before they were actually discovered. Just days before that, there was another hostage discovered in tunnels by himself without any people guarding him there. I mean, what do you make of this, and what does that say about Hamas, the group itself? Are they starting to potentially lose a bit of control?
I think it's more than just a bit of control. Make no mistake, the walls are really closing in on Hamas and the Hamas leadership as they continue to be pushed further south, further into tunnels, have their supply lines cut, and perhaps most importantly, have their leadership gutted in multiple countries, not just in the Gaza Strip. Some of these moves don't read like moves to me to swap hostages like a pawn on a chessboard anymore, as grotesque as that analogy is. These moves, I think, are driven by an entirely different psychology, driven by battlefield desperation, and indeed sheer terror. This is a group that, after all, means what it says, as does its patron, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, that has really mastered the art of hostage diplomacy. This is not hostage diplomacy. This is sheer terror.
I know you do a lot of study on Iran. Iran, obviously, a backer of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of many of these groups in the region, still looming in the background. Obviously, there's a threat of retaliation by Iran against Israel for a previous strike in the capital, Tehran. What do you make of the role of Iran in all of this, and how do you think it's viewing the events we've seen playing out in the last 24 hours?
Well, particularly with respect to domestic issues inside Israel, between the factions, even within the unity government there, no shortage of Iranian state media, semi-official media, as well as axes of resistance, meaning the constellation of proxies and partners the regime has. No shortage of their media as well has been shy of hyping these divisions within Israeli society and even within the Israeli government. Right now, if you look at semi-official Iranian media, you see tons of stories about Netanyahu, you see tons of stories about protests. This is a tactic that the regime has long looked to employ, which is to magnify the divisions of its adversary while trying to minimize their own massive state-society chasm.
There was a sense that Hezbollah had been holding off on its own retaliatory strike to see what might happen with ceasefire negotiations. Do you think Iran is doing the same thing? Do you still expect some sort of attack by Iran?
It's still likely. I wouldn't rule it out. What the Islamic Republic benefits from, though, is after having fired overtly, directly, and kinetically from its own territory, making history on April 13th and 14th, striking Israel, I think they want to dangle the threat of that for the future. And now that we're coming up on 11 months of the war in Gaza, about to hit the 1 year anniversary quite soon, I think the Islamic Republic is quite content with the way things are going in the region and may not feel the need to have to introduce such a change by bringing the conflict potentially onto its own soil.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a tragic anniversary coming up in about a month's time. Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you as always.
Thank you.